Hello everyone and welcome to Microsoft Access 2016 Basics. My name is Steve Bishop, and in this video we're going to be talking about how to alias columns and tables in your SQL queries. So let's say that you once again have a products table in your database, and you'd like to change the way that the columns and the table appears on your query, so that the names of these columns and the table don't look so developer-ish, right? Something a little bit more natural to the reader. So you might want to have an output that looks something like this, where we might change the products table to say something like product list, or we want to change the primary key of product ID to actual just PK. And product name, maybe we want to add a space there between product and name. And same thing with supplier ID and category ID. And maybe instead of saying unit, we want to say quantity. And then of course, maybe instead of price, we want to say cost. So you might want to change the field names that appear in the query, but you don't want to actually change the original names of the tables because that might mess up your queries. So how do you solve this? That's where we can use aliasing, where you take either the table name or column name, and then you use the as keyword, and then you can simply add the new name. You'll notice these straight brackets around the new name. That is not required unless you have a space in the new name. So we'll see, for example, if it's products, like we have up above on our products table, and we want to change it to product list, then we would need to use the open and closed straight brackets around product list because product list contains a space. But if we wanted to change product ID to just PK, you'll notice that we don't have the straight brackets. And then finally, just one last example, you can take the price column from the original table, and you just simply use the as keyword and then say cost is the new name. Let's jump into our Access database and take a look at how we might be able to use this. So for this demonstration, let's just go ahead and once again use the people table, because there's a lot of potential fields here that could be alias. There's the ID field, there's the first name, last name, date of birth. So maybe we want to add a space between first and name. Maybe we want to add a space between last and name, and maybe we want to spell out date of birth instead of just DOB. So this is a good table that we might want to write a query with aliased columns. So I'm going to go up to the Create tab and select Query Designer. And then I'm going to select the People table, and we'll go ahead and add that. And in order to select the fields that I want to display on this query, I'm going to do something a little different than what we've done in the past. I'm going to select the fields that I want to add to the designer down here one at a time by holding the Control key down and selecting each field individually. And you'll see this highlights them as a group. Now I can simply just drag and drop that group onto the designer down below, and it will add them all at once. So if you've been doing it kind of one at a time, dragging and dropping, that's going to be a lot faster for you to do if you have multiple ones that you want to drag and drop. But also you can, another shortcut is to just simply double click on the field you want to add. So if I just double click here on active, you'll notice that it simply adds it. So if you want to do that as kind of a quick way, you can do that as well. So let's go and remove these two columns because I don't want them in this query. And now we've got these four columns here, and each one of them we want to rename. Let's start off with the ID field. Let's say that I wanted to make this the PK field, so short for primary key. So what I'm going to do is in front of the actual field name, I'm going to add my alias name. So I'm just going to say PK. And then after the alias, we put a colon and then a space. So it's just kind of that colon is a separator between the alias and the actual field name. Now, what I'm doing is I'm using the designer here to do the aliasing. We'll see in just a moment when we look at the SQL query itself, what's happening to the actual SQL query language that's behind the background. But for now, we can go ahead and use the designer to alias it by adding the alias name followed by a colon and then the actual field name. So let's go ahead and do that with the first name and the last name. Went a little too far. Try that again. Last name. And for date of birth, or DOB, we're going to actually make it the date of birth. All right, and if we run this as is, we'll see, indeed, all of the field names or all the columns are labeled with the new alias. We can see first name has a space, last name has a space, ID is now PK, and date of birth is fully labeled out here instead of just DOB. So you might be wondering, well, wait a minute, Steve, you said a couple things. First, you said we need the as keyword somewhere in this. I don't see as anywhere. And the second thing is you have first name and last name with spaces as well as date of birth. And didn't you say you need those straight brackets around any sort of alias that's going to include spaces? And you're right. If we take a look at the SQL view, we'll notice that those two things have been added by the Access database automatically, or I should say the Access interface. So here we see as keyword after the correct field name, but then the alias comes afterwards. So ID as PK, first name as first name with a space. And since it has a space, you'll notice that it added those open and close straight brackets. Same thing for last name and date of birth. So there you go. It is in fact adding the as keyword for our aliasing. And then if we have a space in the new alias name, then we're using the open and close straight brackets. And this would be the same if your table itself had a space in the field name. So if we changed, just to show you this, if we change this to say first space name and last space name, then when we write our queries, we actually have to do a similar thing in that we wrap them with open and closed straight brackets like this. Okay, so if you do have spaces in the actual field name, you need to wrap them in straight brackets just as we've wrapped them for the alias here. So if I just click on view, oh, I've already got it open, so it's got some problems with that. Let's close, hold on here, close the query. And then we'll close people, save those changes. And now when we run our query, notice we've got the straight brackets around the actual field name because the field name has a space in it. And when we run this, everything works just fine. But if I didn't have those straight brackets on, this would be quite confusing to the database. So if I just dropped these straight brackets, we're going to get some errors here. Syntax error, missing operator, and query expression, right? Because it doesn't know that this name is not some sort of next keyword. It doesn't know that that's part of the field name that we've labeled here. Now, I'm going to strongly encourage you not to do this. It's perfectly fine to add a space in your aliases. That's perfectly acceptable. But when it comes to the actual field names of the tables themselves, you do not want to be adding spaces. So let me go back and fix this. Yes, I know. Let's go back to our people table, go to the design view. Let's remove those spaces, those nasty, nasty spaces. And now we can fix it here. And there we go. So let's go ahead and save this. And just do a quick run of it, make sure it works. Sure does. So once again, we've aliased our column names using the as keyword followed by whatever the alias is. And if we have a space in the name of the alias, then we need to use those open and close straight brackets. Now, one of the other things that we can alias is the table itself. So notice that we're saying from people. I can change this to a new name using the as keyword followed by whatever it is that I want to rename it. So I'm going to say persons. Okay, so it's not exactly a great name for a table, but just for our demonstration purposes, we'll go with that. Now, if I do alias the people table as persons, what do you suppose that's going to do to all of our select statement? Okay, because notice that our select statement is still looking at the people table, right? So if I run this, we're going to see, wait a minute, what did you mean by people.id? I don't see a people.id. What do you mean by people.firstname? I don't see a people.firstname, etc. So if we're going to do this aliasing or changing a table to this other name, you need to make sure that your select statement reflects that name. So we're going to say persons. okay, for each one of these. And now with each one of these select statements asking for persons instead of people, when we run this, it works. Maybe another way you could do that is to actually drop off the identification of the table itself and just say select ID as PK, and same thing with first name. That way you're not specifying the table name at all. But in general, it's a good idea to give the fully qualified name to that table, or I should say to that field on the table, so that there's no miscommunication about where that particular field is coming from. It's very helpful, especially when you're dealing with inner joins and outer joins. You might have field names that are exactly the same on more than one table. And doing this kind of aliasing can really help you in labeling the results that you're expecting into something that the users are really going to understand. So if I run this, just to show you that if I remove all the references to the persons table in that select statement, it's going to go ahead and work anyway. So if you plan on changing a lot of aliases, maybe that's an effective way of doing it without having to go through and rename everything. But in general, it still really is a good practice to add that alias name here or give the fully qualified name to that field. So we're going to say persons.firstname and persons.lastname. Okay, so there you have it. That's how you can alias a table as well as the columns. And we'll see in an upcoming episode where when we're working with subqueries, you can also alias those subqueries to make things a little easier to understand. I'd like to thank these members of the channel. Without your continued support, this channel would not be possible. Thank you.